Lee Delaney, welcome to Podcast Radio. How are you?
Hi, Graham. I'm good. Thanks very much for having me on.
We were just talking before we went live. You find yourself in Wakefield.
Yep, not somewhere I ever thought I was going to end up, but we just moved out of London recently. My girlfriend's a Yorkshire born and bred, has the tattoo and everything, so we wanted to get back out into the real world rather than the fancy media London metropolis kind of world. So yeah, we're just waiting to kind of push through our own kind of buying somewhere. So very luckily living for free with the in-laws, which is good fun, but not so good for the size of my belly at the minute. So
Well, you got Christmas dinner coming up. To be stuck
yep,
somewhere
yep,
with someone who knows what they're doing in the kitchen for Christmas dinner. That's not a bad thing.
yep, definitely. Very much looking forward to that one.
We're going to talk about curiosity cake, staying with the food theme, even though curiosity cake is not about food. Curiosity cake is more of a serving suggestion for when you're listening to curiosity cake. I want to talk about that in a bit, but I want to find out more about you. Obviously, you're from Northern Ireland.
Yeah, that's right. I was born in Belfast, pretty much, but lived out in the countryside a little bit in Northern Ireland, till I was about 18, and then like lots of people, we kind of just disappear to find work and do interesting things. Northern Ireland can be a bit quiet can be a bit quiet when we're not blowing each other up. So
I'm
yeah,
glad you
so
said that, not me. Goodness me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've lived away for a good while now, but have been, obviously like go back except for this year. It's been a while since I've been back. So Christmas would normally be there, but having to wait until all of this dies down a bit.
Now, in the trailer to your podcast, you say that you were the kind of kid that had the chemistry set and the telescope and the microscope and stuff. Were you a nerdy kid? Because the podcast, we should say for
Yeah.
anyone that doesn't know, you talk to some of the world's leading scientists about scientific principles, but in a user friendly way. Because
Mm.
scientists have a habit of losing you, but you try and bring everybody in to keep the conversation nice and wide. Were you a nerdy scientific type of kid?
Yeah, definitely. So like you're saying, like, my parents, had got me a chemistry set, microscope, telescope, all of those things. I would, all my electronic toys, I'd take them apart and just try to, work out what was going on, put them back together, the usual kind of bits still left over, but they still managed to work, which was all right. Um, I would like catch insects and things just to kind of like just watch how they moved and acted and things like that, and let them go again. So I just kind of grew up just being really curious and liking learning, and like even remember like the first time I got a library card and I'd be going every week with like getting out as many books as you were allowed to. So I'd be there like week after week doing that. And just as I've grown up, I've kind of kept that interest, kept reading, kept trying to wanting to find out about stuff. Didn't I've done the sort of academic thing, but didn't really want to work in academia because I've so many things that I find interesting that I didn't want to do the academic. Here's the one thing, and you've got to be interested in that and just work deeper and deeper and deeper down into that. So that's kind of part of the reason why I started the podcast, to just follow that curiosity of different kind of topics. But like you're saying, keep it accessible for like ordinary people. Because I'm just a normal person. I've got a day job. I'm not an actual kind of paid scientist. I don't work in science. So like the conversations have to be accessible for me to be able to follow. So if I can follow it, then like anyone listening can follow it.
And what is the day job?
I work as a data analyst in the civil service.
Right. So
Yeah.
you say data analyst, which makes me think it's a bit number crunching. But then when you say civil
Yeah.
service, that sounds like that could be interesting.
Yeah, it's a real mix of things. So you have to have, even as an analyst in that more of a techie kind of role, you have to have those wider communication skills because you're working with people who are in policy. You might be like communicating to ministers. You might be putting something out that's, a statistical publication that's for the general public even. So like things like the COVID stuff at the minute, the general public be really interested in that. the ONS data. Like one of their most popular things is like baby names, the most popular baby names of the year. So like people look forward to that one coming out. So you have to have that ability to do the number crunching, but then explain it to people who aren't number crunchers. So I find that transitions well to like the podcast kind of as well. So that I've got to research things quite quickly, and then talk to the expert people, but do that in a way so that it's understandable.
So how long would you spend then researching a guest?
Um, Depends how much I know about the topic already. So in the new year, I'm talking to a guy called Brad Warner, who's a Zen Buddhist teacher. And I'd read a whole bunch of his books when I was younger and kind of practiced meditation from like the way he taught. So like that, I was able to just go into that and have a conversation with him about it. But then there's other things, like recently I was talking to philosopher Dave Ellis from Bangor University about language around religion, and if there's a relationship between religion and science. I had to do a good bit more kind of research on that one. So it can be like maybe a week's probably the most I would do, just in terms of ideally you'd be able to do more, but obviously I put the podcast out every 2 weeks, so I've got to try and stay within that schedule and give myself time to do all the editing as well, because I'm like a one-man show. I don't have a kind of team behind me or anything.
You mentioned a couple of religious things there. I mean, you did that one. Was what was the name of the episode? It was, is there a link between spirituality?
Is there a connection between scientific fact and spiritual wisdom?
Yeah, so you mentioned that, and then also talking to a Zen Buddhist. You would think they would be strange guests for a podcast that is really about science, when science, religion is almost the enemy of science at times.
Well, that's part of what kind of that episode with the philosopher gets into. And really, I've done a lot of science stuff on the podcast so far, but I actually intend for it to be wider than just science. So I want like philosophy and history and things like that in there as well. And I've spoken to like Marianne Cantwell, who does like kind of like business career coaching and things. But you're right, like a big strong interest for me is science, and I've done a lot of that so far. But I think like science and religion are they're trying to answer the same kind of questions to a large extent, like those big questions of like, who are we, why are we here? And I think that they try to answer those kinds of questions, but they go about it in different ways. And I think Dave put it really well in that there's certain things that science will give us brilliant answers for, but there's other things that science just can't cover. That's the kind of the heart of our life and what it means to be human. Science can tell us about the meat of our bodies and how our brains work and things like that, but maybe religion or that kind of tradition of spiritual wisdom is where we need to go to look for more of a that kind of deeper level understanding of ourselves.
Really? Because, a lot of particularly, the older religions, they basically believed the world was flat and didn't know where the sun went at night.
Yeah, but I think you can. I think it's one of those of.
And the newer ones believe we come from flying saucers and aliens. I mean, either way, I don't see them being helpful.
Well, I had an episode with the astronomer Lisa Harvey Smith, and we were talking.
That was a good episode, actually. Yeah.
Lisa was just amazing. She's so good. There's a star there, and we butchered it during the episode as well. But I think the pronunciation is Podbilsky's star. And there's a theory there that it has so much radioactive matter in it that scientists are like, it shouldn't have that much. Why is there so much radioactive matter in that star? And one of the theories is that aliens put it there. So I think scientists can very much get into the realm of the sci-fi, the kind of spiritual things as well. And obviously, like when you go back to like Newton, Einstein, people like that. You have people who had very strong like religious beliefs. Like Newton was an alchemist to some extent.
Uh-huh.
Which is really interesting. And they all had very strong belief in gods as in God as well.
Do you think,
Um,
though, religion, though, I mean, I think the main difference between science and religion, and I don't want to get too far into this because it'll get us into a lot of trouble, but I think the main difference between science and religion is science is quite happy to question what it's already discovered and change its mind, whereas religion will give an answer and basically not be that keen on having its mind, its collective mind changed.
Yeah, so science has the scientific method, and you have to go through that process. There's not really that kind of same framework
And people are
structure.
happy to say if they can prove it, to say that, well, Einstein got this bit wrong. For someone to say that about a religion getting something wrong is seen as almost disrespectful. I'll give you a small example. My wife and I are not religious. However, one of the things I do as well as podcast radio is I produce and narrate audiobooks. And I did one recently that had some, shall we say, spicy chapters in it. And when you've done the audiobook at the end, you're allowed to put a pseudonym down so that if there's material in there you're not that comfortable with, but you just want the money, you can put any old name you want. So I said to Julie, I think it would be funny to put my name as Justin Welby, because that's the name of the Archbishop of Canterbury. And to me, I would have thought that would be funny to think that the Archbishop of Canterbury would be reading this stuff out loud. And neither of us are religious, but Julie said, no, don't do that. Not a good idea, because, you're supposed to have some kind of respect for these people. However, if I'd have said I might put Albert Einstein down, I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. You know what I've said? What I'm trying to get to is the respect that religion gets is not the same as the respect that science gets, but maybe science should get more respect.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Like, I think, we should have scientists who are like rock stars, and, I mean, there's Brian Cox, but he's maybe the only one.
He's a bit annoying though for me. He's done amazing things to bring science to people who it wouldn't normally appeal to. And when I say he's a bit annoying, if he is watching this or this gets to him, I really do think he's great. But I just wish he was more of a rock star,
Right. Okay. So pushing that bit of it more. Yeah. And I think you're right as well. Like, I don't think we should have protection around kind of religious figures that they can't be criticized. Like, we should be able to have discourse and conversations and debate about things where we're respectful of people. But we don't need to be so respectful of people where we can't critique their beliefs. I think that's what we live in liberal democracy. That's what liberalism is all about, isn't it? Is that you can come to the truth by having an open discussion and giving people space to talk about all of their ideas. And again, that's why I like about my podcast. I'm trying to give people space to get their ideas out, whether I agree with them or not, in a way where they can just talk about it and go deep into it without it being like, like the sort of like, the 6 o'clock news type aggressive question, and we're like, you can't really get the nuts and bolts of things. And it's a bit too challenging at the minute, I think, where you can't really get the whole idea across. Everything's like a kind of 5-second kind of soundbite thing, isn't it? But I think you're right. I think like anyone, whether they're scientists, whether they're a religious person or not, like anyone, if they're if they're going to share an opinion, you should be open to people challenging your opinion, as long as it's done respectfully, and ideally if people are like challenging and developing their opinions where they're actually looking at kind of evidence and things like that to kind of back it up. But in the real world, people have very emotional reactions to things, don't they? And not that there's anything wrong with that, but lots of our opinions, we maybe have a quick emotional reaction to something, and then we build the intellectual case up after that.
So what do you do, Lee, when you're interviewing somebody and they say something that you maybe don't agree with and you want to challenge them on that? how much of a pass? Where's that balance? Because like you say, you've got to be respectful to their beliefs, but you've also got to, if you have got an opinion on it and would just like to challenge them to go a little bit deeper, how do you touch that? Because that's one of the hardest things to do, I find, when I'm talking to people.
I think it's a good question. I don't think I've necessarily sat down and thought about like what's my strategy to do this.
Yeah.
Uh, and maybe I should. I think I just do it. Like I think maybe it comes from just the way that I talk to people. Like I'm quite calm and laid back, and I'm not a big emotional kind of aggressive person. So like someone saying something I disagree with, I'm not going to be like, what are you talking about? Surely you can't think that, blah, 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 and kind of, rant off. For me, I'll ask kind of exploratory questions that are quite open. And I usually try to frame something that makes it impersonal as well. So I might, use that language where I'm not saying like, oh, well, I disagree with what you're saying. I might say, well, what would you say to someone who maybe thinks this, and, this is the counter argument to what you're talking about. So it kind of keeps things on that neutral sort of level. I think that's probably how I usually go about that.
Yeah, the last thing you want a guest to do is get all defensive, and you're not really getting
Yeah.
anywhere, because it's got to be a warm, and you do it very well, by the way. Your
Oh, thanks
chats are
very much.
very warm, kind of almost a fireside chat kind of thing, a very intimate. No, they are a very intimate chat that you have with them, probably because you are a very calm person. You don't seem to get overly excited. You just,
Yeah.
it's a very calm and friendly thing, and I think that works really well. I enjoyed the one you did with what was the guy's name? It was about the crystals and the coronavirus, really, which are
Yeah.
two things I'd never put. Dr. Sam Horrell. That's
Dr.
it.
Sam Harrell. Yeah,
That was the
that was it.
recent one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just come out, I think. Yeah, as we record this. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was someone else. He has a very calm, kind of quieter way of talking as well. But he's working on understanding the structure of the coronavirus. Like he admitted himself, and I think I actually cut it out in editing. But he was saying himself like he doesn't have a huge part in it. Like he's not saving the world from coronavirus. But his work in studying kind of crystals. So he learns about the structure of proteins through creating crystals, and uses a method with X-rays where they'll produce a crystal, fire X-rays at it, and then they get a pattern kind of on a wall like behind the crystal where it shows where all the X-rays are coming through. So the pattern then shows where there's matter and where there isn't matter. And that helps scientists then just develop the actual material structure of a protein. So he's been involved in work that's on coronavirus that helps them understand the structure of coronavirus, and then how it works. And that science is then being used in developing the drugs that are being used to treat people when they have it as well. Which must be, again, it's one of the amazing things to do this podcast where you talk to people doing things like that. It's one of the things I enjoy the most about it, of how exciting that must be and how important that must be as well.
Who's been your favorite guest so far?
Ah, I knew you were going to ask me something like that. I think, Lisa Harvey Smith was brilliant. I think there's so many people. There was a guy called Balint Cacho who was talking about ants. And he was just so enthusiastic. I was even actually looking for someone to talk about a different kind of insect, but from doing that research to find someone, I came across him, and his enthusiasm was so much, I just dropped the other idea and just said to him, "Oh, will you come and talk about ants?" And he was well up for it, and he just loves the subject so much that it just, like, I barely had to do anything, for that episode to be good. Like he was so great. I think even during that episode, I was constantly, it was just wow moment after wow moment. I thought ants were going to be interesting, but there was so much more to it than I like even imagined there was going to be. So that was definite favorite. Did one about nuclear fusion with Nick Walkden, who works at the UK Atomic Energy Authority. Again, someone else who's really passionate, really enjoys talking about his subject, and another really fascinating kind of topic where he works at a site in Oxfordshire. And he was saying that when they are working on fusion and getting it going, is that they actually create heat that makes it the hottest place in the solar system. So like fusion works where you have to generate a large amount of heat because it's mimicking what goes on in the sun.
But it'll only be in
So
a tiny space, I'm guessing. But in that
yeah,
space, it's the hot.
yeah, it's in that like that small contained space, and there's a lot of kind of fallout science that goes around of like the materials that you use in there, the robotics for like how you get that to work and like repair the materials and things, because obviously like humans can't go into that space. So that was another great episode with lots of little kind of bits from that. One of my first episodes was with a nutritionist talking about her approach to like no nonsense nutrition, and she uses the term nutribolics of like lots of the kind of Gwyneth Paltrow style kind of nutrition advice where we're like, we talk about, what's a good and sensible, reasonable way to approach kind of healthy eating, because like every day there's almost different articles about what's healthy, and she told me about some crazy diets of like cabbage diet where people would just eat cabbage, cotton wool diet where people are eating cotton wool. I think the idea is that then that fills you up so you don't want to eat anymore. I don't know how people can do that. I don't know if they're putting like HP sauce on the cotton wool or like tomato ketchup or something to try to make it palatable to get it down. But yeah.
Do you think?
So
Sorry, what were you going to say?
no, I was just gonna say like I don't think I can say like what's my favorite guest so far.
No, because
I
you've got to
think
get guests. How do you get your guests?
Generally I just email them and ask if they'll be
So it's someone
on.
that you're generally you discover them. However, they come across, and you think, oh, this would be an interesting person to get on, and that's the motivation to get them.
Yeah, I'll either kind of think of a topic that I want to do beforehand and then go and find someone, or just as I've been trying to build up my Twitter presence, like following like academics, like academic Twitter and things like that. It's just coming across people through those conversations. So, there was a really great person called Helena Hartman that did an episode. She studies the relationship between pain and empathy. Her kind of hypothesis being that we develop a certain level of empathy through seeing the pain that other people go through. So she actually does experiments where she inflicts little bits of pain on people to see what happens in their brain, what it does to like the regions where empathy.
Great job for a massive sadist, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It's just she uses those electric shocks. So it's not too much. There's much more extreme people researching pain. Like there's one guy that did a load of experiments on himself, where he was inflicting pain in different kinds of ways. So like I think he had an insect sting his testicles, and he was then kind of giving everything a score.
Really? So what did you do at work today, dear?
Yeah, I mean that's a real dedication to science. Isn't it?
You talk about suffering for his art. Yeah. So do you think by and large though we are getting more or less curious?
That's an interesting one. I'll have to. Do you know what? Maybe that's a good episode topic.
I think by and large people are getting less curious. I consider myself very lucky. I was very young. I was 5 years old when I watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon live on TV at about 4 a.m. or whenever it was. And the fact that they did that made me, I think I was a reasonably curious kid, but I think the fact that they were doing something literally out of this world, something completely incredible, made me think, well, what else can happen? We as kids, that was the Apollo space program was a big deal. But then on a Sunday evening, we'd watch The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, and then of course we had David Attenborough was omnipresent, And I wonder, with the exception of David Attenborough, whether people are not as curious as they once were about the world around them.
Yeah, I suppose we have a bit of an information overload, don't we? So
It's about filtering information now rather than trying to get information.
yeah, and that's a skill, isn't it? It's like something you've got to really work out. And even, we've talked a bit about like news and stuff. Like I think it's very hard to find like objective news at the minute because everything's coming through this filter. Um, that's maybe for people blame social media for it and that now, don't they? But everything seems to be very opinionated. We don't get so much of just objective news anymore. It's very much editorializing. And again, that's something that I try to make sure I steer away from with the podcast of like,
Yeah.
um, you know, let's talk about the ideas, but without necessarily being about what did I think about all these things. Um, but yeah, I mean, hopefully Curiosity Cake kind of helps get people interested in being curious and helps them a good, easy way to kind of find all these different kind of topics, so that they can just discover new things or discover old things that they knew about, but that maybe a different angle to. Um, I guess we're probably in a bit of a phase where I think it takes us as humanity a while to adjust to things. So like a bit like food where we created all of this kind of convenient food and we needed it because we entered a kind of time after the war where um both parents were out working, the kind of working class kind of exploded. Both parents were working. And so we needed quick, easy ways to kind of prepare foods. And now we're kind of finding that maybe there's kind of problems with that kind of approach. So you've got all the organic movement and things like that, and people trying to go back to using more just like, meat, vegetables, the kind of natural foods. And it took us a while to kind of see those issues, and to kind of adjust our behavior. And I think the social media thing will be the same. I think we're already having conversations about like the harms around kind of overuse of social media or the way people are using it. Like the way kids are growing up with it and things. And we'll start to kind of adjust to that as well. So I think hopefully it'll mean that we go back to having more healthier discourse where people, a bit more tolerant of people that think differently to them, so we can share ideas a bit more of an easier way, and that people maybe get that kind of curiosity again.
What podcasts inspire you?
I think I was talking to someone earlier today about this. I'm starting to think the Curiosity Cake is a bit of a cross between In Our Time and the Joe Rogan podcast. Um,
Well,
so
it's
I think
long
it's
form
got
interviews, so it's got the Joe Rogan element to it,
yeah,
definitely.
it's got the Joe Rogan
All
thing
you
without
need is 100 million from Spotify, and you'll be exactly the same.
yeah. Well, I think they were telling me it's in the post, so I'm just
Is
keeping
it?
an eye
Okay, well, good
on
luck with that. Yeah, well, they've set a precedent now. You better tell them it's like the Joe Rogan podcast.
that. Yeah. So the Joe Rogan thing, that sort of bit longer form, not quite as long as Joe, not quite as rambly, I don't think. And definitely less of the kind of drug and celebrities
Yeah,
on it,
yeah,
I think.
yeah.
But then within our time, it's kind of similarly jumping to those different subjects, but without, the sort of uh stuffiness isn't a very generous way to put it, but you know what I mean. It's not that very formal academic kind of thing like you're saying. I'm just having conversations with people that I come across who are doing interesting things, and I could be doing that like in a cafe or in a pub or something. And that's the kind of tone that I want to get across.
Has lockdown affected it?
Well, I only started it in lockdown, so it
Oh,
hasn't
wow.
really. um
So you do the
like
guests a similar way to this on a Skype or Zoom or?
Yeah. I use like Squadcast to kind of record and things. So I just bought some new kit to hopefully kind of make things a bit quicker. But yeah, everything's remote, which I think is good because if I hadn't started during lockdown, I probably would have been trying to do something silly like traveling all around the country to like go and try and physically be in a room with people. And I think lockdown has obviously made me not do that, but realize that actually you can do it just remotely, and I can get good enough sound quality from people on the other end where I don't really have so much control over it, but where it's you can still listen to it fine. So I think that's been good. and I probably wonder a bit, with lockdown, lots of people just being at home, not spending as much time working. Maybe there's more people ready to go on some random guy's podcast that just emails out of the blue and says, "Hey, will you come and do this?"
Yeah, I did one
Uh,
with Dom Jolly like this, and I'm sure I got Dom
yeah, I saw that one.
because of lockdown, because
Right.
he was available. I don't know. Having said that, I would have loved to have gone and hung out with him in his home or wherever
Oh
we
yeah.
met up. I think that years ago I did an interview with John Cleese in his office in Chelsea, and that was so much
Oh
fun.
wow.
It wasn't for
Yeah,
this particular
brilliant.
show. It was for a podcast I did for the USA. But um, when we get back out of lockdown, do you think you'll go out and meet some of your guests, or will you continue to do it remotely?
I'll probably continue to do it remotely, kind of mainly from just that thing of having to juggle a job and a podcast, because um, like you've got to put a lot of time into
Oh,
the
this is an
podcast.
incredibly efficient way to record interviews. Incredibly efficient, yeah. You lose a day if you have to go and see someone to record an interview with them. You've got to put a day aside, or at least half a day. Whereas this, a few hours and you're done.
Yeah,
Get it
it's a
set up,
very
find out
different
about them.
thing.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing to physically go to someone or have them come to you, isn't it? Because you're then getting into like people's personal space or your personal space,
And
and maybe
schedules.
that and schedules, yeah, and maybe that's another barrier that would make people just say no. So I think, yeah, lockdown definitely helps, and I'm sure, like, I wonder how much money Amazon have made from like loads of people just starting up podcasts.
Yeah,
Um,
Amazon and Rode microphones, I think, have been the big winners out of this
yeah,
whole thing.
when I was looking for mics, it took a little while for me to be able to find someone that had mics in stock. So
Yeah? Yeah?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it was. There was one place there was a particular one I thought would be good. I can't remember what it was, but I was talking to some people and like, we don't have that one. These are similar, but we don't have those either. So it took a little while to get them.
Okay, so where can we find out more about it's a wonderful podcast. It's called Curiosity Cake, and your suggestion is that you sit down with a cup of tea and cake and just listen to it. But you can listen
Yeah,
in the car or listen wherever. That's only a serving
you can listen to the
suggestion.
car.
Yeah.
Yep, you can have sausage roll if you want. Doesn't have to be cake. If you're off the carbs for, New Year or anything like that. So yeah, so there's a website which is just www.curiositycake.co.uk. I'm also on Twitter. So that's at curiosity_cake. And I'm Instagram as well, which I think is just Curiosity Cake Pod. Can't remember. Should probably check that one out.
You'll find it. Put Curiosity Cake in there. You'll find it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Lee
definitely.
Delaney, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on and telling me all
Graham,
about it on podcast radio.
that was awesome. It was really good fun. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And the show, in case you don't know, in case you're watching this live, what this is, Lee will be my guest in about 4 weeks' time. It'll be after Christmas. It'll be in the new year. And I do a show on podcast radio, which goes out at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and then it's repeated across the weekend on podcast radio on DAB in London, Manchester, Glasgow, the home counties, and online everywhere else. And then the show itself becomes a podcast. And look forward in about 4 weeks' time. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll tweet you, and I'm sure Lee will when Lee is the special guest on podcast
Definitely.
radio. Once again, Lee Delaney from Curiosity Cake, thank you very much for being on podcast radio.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure.